Well, I think at the underpinnings or the root of vitality is energy. So if we understand what the body has to do in order to optimize energy, I think that is the single most important thing that ties in with health. Because the one thing that seems true of this world is without energy, things die. And every single person who is struggling with some kind of issue, disease, whatever you want to call it, has an energy problem. Just not everyone actually understands that that's a lens that you could look through primarily, then you select for the condition afterwards. So if I say mitochondria to the world, this is what everyone says. It's nightmares of grade 10 biology, the powerhouse of the cell. Is it wrong? No. Is it all it does? Absolutely not. But does anyone want to try to hazard a guess as to why, in my world, mitochondrial health is like the crux of everything that ties in with what we spoke about last month about the water and the light and the magnetic fields and all that kind of stuff? Why would mitochondria be so important?
Because the environmental and the physiological state that goes into the production of that mitochondria determines your overall vitality or
Boom,
lack thereof.
boom. Said a different way, if there is not optimal or healthy mitochondrial function, there is a lack of energy. Where there is a lack of energy, there is a decline of function. And most people don't think about this in the context of just supporting someone's health in general, because when a problem's already there, that's been in the works for quite some time. So we come back to this thing, right? If we are an organism that is comprised of cells, and each and every cell has, and this is a cool fact, like on the low side, maybe 500 mitochondria, on the high side, maybe 2000 in like a neuron or a liver cell. All those little, underlings, they're there to support us, have to prop up each cell, which props up each organ and tissue and organ systems and what have you. So when you got someone who's not doing well as a person, we have to ask, where is the energy problem, and is it systemic or is it in multiple organs? So these are the most important foundational aspects that I really want to communicate today. The first one is true in all aspects of biology, and energy is foundational for all aspects of life. Without energy, nothing will survive. And this is a foundational piece, because if we're someone who has chronic fatigue syndrome, that's really easy. But what about other conditions that we may not think about that tie into that statement? That brings me into the next one. All degenerative conditions are energy problems to some degree. When we have a condition pop up, like Raphael mentioned, inflammation, what is inflammation? It's the body trying to heal itself. But you have to ask, what is the first problem? Or what was the problem in the first place? What was the thing that started that need for compensation? And the body can compensate. And I always love to say this, it compensates until it doesn't. And this is a subjective statement for everyone. Some people are born with very resilient stress management tolerance. Some people have very strong metabolic function because they had very healthy parents. Some people don't, and they don't have the ability to manage stress on a physiologic or a psychological perspective very well. And those are the people that typically find their way into your clients' offices. They've not been feeling well. They've gone to the doctor. The blood test looks normal. And it's something that's more under the surface, more than under the surface. It's a little bit deeper. And what all clinicians, in my opinion, should strive to do, regardless of what their specialty is, and I do think that you guys can bring this philosophy forwards, is if you don't remove all the blockages to energy flow, the decline is imminent. What does that mean? If you don't reverse engineer what created the problem and find a way to allow that body to restore health, a chronic degenerative disease is unfortunately probably in the cards for someone. And these are foundational aspects that all health professionals need to understand. And I don't think that functional medicine and some of these other platforms do a good job of teaching the importance of this. I know mitochondrial function and energy metabolism is a very popularly spoken about topic or taught topic. And I just taught a class online at the school I used to teach at and graduated from in Vancouver. And they just finished their body metabolism course. And these are nutrition professionals who are basically 6 months away from starting to work with clients. None of them understood metabolism. They remembered all the different things in metabolism, but it's not made practical. So when something doesn't allow its purview to come into your perspective, it's just information. So my hope today is, with, I think, very few of you having any formal biochemical background, I would like to teach you more practical understanding of energy metabolism than a lot of doctors have. Because guess what? If they're busy, they don't have time to do this stuff. So if we're talking about a cell, these are all the things that a cell needs to survive. It needs nutrition, it needs to bring oxygen in. Inside the cell, there's specialized, these things, I don't know if you've heard of them, they're called enzymes. They catalyze reactions. The cell needs to eliminate things. So, it's like a kitchen, right? You bring food in from the grocery store, you cook that food, you take out the garbage after you're done. A cell needs to do the same thing. It needs its own housekeeping, right? It needs to synthesize cellular components. What does that mean? Cells make proteins, cells make fats, phospholipids, various other things. It needs to control the exchange of materials between the cell and its surrounding environment. So cells do the same thing. They're chronically and constantly in communication with themselves and with their surrounding environment. So this way they can know what do I have to respond to, because the sensing and the responding in that environment changes how a cell behaves. A cell needs to reproduce, it needs to get it on, but it does it with itself. And then there are those, specialized aspects of what determines how a nerve cell works and sends a message utilizing, nerve transduction with neurotransmitters. And then there's a liver cell, which knows how to chemically modify things that are harmful to the body so they can be harmlessly excreted when we, have a bowel movement. So what underpins all of these things taking place is providing or assuming the cell has adequate energy. Does it have enough? All of these little guys right here, and then what I don't like about these cellular models is that they just decide a random number of things. Like there's 3 mitochondria here, they kind of look like beans. That's not how all cells work. But every single what's called organelle, so each cell is its own little microcosm. It's a little universe that is self-sustaining. The most important thing that underpins this cell's health is energy production. So these little mitochondria actually move around the cell and they will spit out energy for all the things that need to take place. So an example would be when a cell divides, the genetic material is splitting in two, and that's a very energy intensive process. So if we have a healthy cell and enough energy, cell division is seamless. If we have a sick cell with energy inadequacy, that cell division is probably more laborious, but it's also going to give birth to a sick cell. And that
very similar to a nuclear bomb.
There you go. And that's a pretty awesome lead in, because when we're healthy, cells have a lifespan. And think about your grandparents, think about your parents, think about your children. The direct health status of everyone has a lineage there, right? So it's unfortunate to say that if your parents weren't healthy, it puts you a little bit more behind the 8 ball, but you can actually change the state of your health based upon how you treat your cells. Now, if a cell is healthy and it needs to basically reproduce, so its lifespan is over, and your GI cells reproduce every 3 to 5 days. Think about that. Think how often gut cells are dividing. And that's a great thing to remember, because when a cell reproduces more quickly, it has the opportunity to become problematic quicker, but it can also help regenerate itself quicker. So a leaky gut is an easier scenario to take care of, where a neuronal cell might be around for 6 months. So if you have some kind of viral infection or gut-brain dysfunction, it's going to take a little bit longer to feel the effects of seeing those cells work better. But this is a normal process. This is called apoptosis. It's like a programmed cell death, and the cells dying is to give birth to a daughter and to not affect the environment around it. So back to Jason's fart, if it's silent but deadly, everyone's going to suffer. And sorry, Jason, you're easy because your camera's off today and you're probably lying down.
It's okay. I'm trying not to laugh.
And if it's harmless and only he knows it slipped out, that's like apoptosis. There's another pathway though. There are other pathways that are not so benign. They're very malignant. And when we talk about inflammation, like Raphael mentioned and Jason mentioned, a nuclear bomb, if a cell is not well and it decides that it needs to commit kamikaze suicide for the betterment of the community, instead of imploding and being harmless, it can explode. And that explosion causes a whole bunch of downstream consequences. It's called necrosis. It even sounds disgusting. And it releases all kinds of inflammatory compounds. And because cells are chronically in communication with each other, the neighbors are alerted that there's a threat, there's a danger. And this is a way that inflammation can become sustained in the body, because when the toxins of a cell that exploded infiltrate the local community, it's like a toxic person coming into someone's home. Everyone's going to get negatively affected. And if you don't have enough energy, and if you're not healthy enough to deal with this kinds of stress, then the cycle perpetuates and inflammation is sustained. And then that's one aspect of what we're trying to offset and fight with the use of enzymes, probiotics, and other nutrients. We're trying to put in the right signals to help reverse engineer the consequential damage of what may be happening here. So what does that mean from a practical thing? What can you talk to about your clients, your doctors, your practitioners about that? Well, is there an energy problem in cancer? Yeah, every cancerous cell, for the most part, has broken aerobic metabolism. Aerobic means with oxygen. That's the fundamental process that we make energy, because it is highly efficient and it is highly beneficial for us to be able to sustain not only periods without food, but needing to consume less food to get more energy out of the food we eat. So the one commonality with cancer cells is they become very anaerobic, very predominantly making energy without oxygen. They become also what's called very glycolytic. They use carbohydrates very aggressively as a fuel source, and they are like zombies. They will replicate incredibly fast because that's what they've been programmed to do, because survival of their lifespan is so short. What about autoimmunity? Yeah, if an organ's getting bombarded by the immune system, do you think that there's going to be an energy problem there? Two ways. Number one, energy that could otherwise go to sustaining that organ's function is going to be diverted to your immune system, because the body can only make so much energy in a day. Everyone has a maximum amount of ATP they can synthesize. But the other thing that's really interesting to think about is we have genetic material in our cells, and our mitochondria have very unique genes that they can serve. I think it's about 16 unique genes that are specific to your mitochondria. And when there's a lot of inflammation, the mitochondrial genetic genome, the gene code rather, gets bombarded, and all of a sudden they start producing dysfunctional mitochondria. So autoimmunity can have a very systemic but very, very acute problem where that organ has a really hard time regenerating itself when it's chronically in a flare. How about neurodegeneration? Yeah, Parkinson's is a mitochondrial problem. They call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes of the brain. Again, energy problems predominantly. Metabolic syndrome, and how about type 2 or adult onset diabetes? Yeah, your body has an energy toxicity problem. It does not have the ability to convert the food that you're eating because of dysfunction in your physiology, and rather than burn the energy, it stores it. And when it stores it perpetually, your metabolism, for lack of a better description, breaks because it dysregulates how your hormones can control traffic and regulate everything. How about cardiovascular issues, heart attacks, blockages in the arteries? Well, if my heart, which is probably one of the most mitochondrial dense organs, has to pump harder, if it's getting a lack of oxygen because of blood flow restriction, and if the muscles are getting stressed because it needs to work harder to pump blood around the body, could you see how that fatigue can deplete energy concentration in the heart? The heart only has so many beats engineered in it until it eventually expires. And if you speed them up or you increase the force of contraction perpetually and not via exercise, that's a big problem. So it comes back to everything really is about balancing energy. And energy has this anabolic, catabolic. I like to make it, practical when you want to use yin and yang, if you want to be a little cliche, or the concept of a debit and a credit. It really is kind of like a bank account. There's energy in, there's energy out. And I like the concept of maintaining an ideal long-range plan to sustain our health in the same way that you would sit down with a financial planner to ensure that you always had resources available to you for long-term retirement. So when energy comes in, the energy actually gets broken down to release, or I shouldn't say the energy, The food comes into the cell and gets broken down to release the energy in the food. That's the catabolic process. And if that process is blocked, then the ability to use that energy to rebuild things, the anabolic side, gets dysregulated or it gets compromised. So we want to have a natural and regulated flow of energy into the cell. We want our cells to be efficient and able to break that energy down. We want our catabolic processes to be strong so that energy can be released, so that cell can do work and be a healthy cell, which contributes to a healthy organ, which contributes to a healthy organism. It's really that simple in essence. And as health professionals, practitioners, clinicians, doctors, we have to be the Sherlock Holmes to figure out where and why is this process blocked in our patients who are not well. Because this is a massive side of regulating physiology long-term. This is why things like low-carb diets have benefits, and intermittent fasting and caloric restriction and all these things, is most people have broken these pathways. The anabolic side is typically the one that predominates because our bodies can't break down energy efficiently. So here's an interesting thing. If we use the combination of anabolic, which is growth, and catabolic, which is breakdown, if someone has metabolic syndrome or they're obese, is that an anabolic problem for the body or a catabolic problem for the body? Love to hear someone jump in. Metabolic syndrome is being excessively overweight, obese, obviously. So is that an anabolic problem or is it a catabolic problem?
Both sides?
It's absolutely both sides, Kathy. Awesome. So their tissue, their body, to figure out the catabolic problems becomes overly anabolic. They increase the number of fat cells in their bodies. They deposit fat in different organs. And as a result, it compromises their metabolism. So their ability to break down energy, their catabolic processes are very compromised. And how can you say that this is not debatable? Well, if someone's got 150 pounds to lose, why can't they simply just burn the energy that's stored on their body? The physiology is broken, the mechanisms are broken. So the concept of maintaining long-term health and adequate, if not optimal, energy metabolism pathways is really regulating these two things from like a 30,000 foot satellite view. And then when you want to go down into the microscope, peering through the lens, so to speak, that's when you do functional medicine lab tests or muscle testing or whatever your way of assessing where the blockage is. Because if you remove the blockage on the microscopic level, then things restore to order, and then the 30,000 foot satellite view starts to rectify itself. Because the body really doesn't care where energy comes from. This is the pathway and the stuff that everyone tries to forget in biochemistry and physiology. This is how your body makes energy. And choices are contextual, meaning if I have a carbohydrate available to me, if I have an apple, my body's going to make energy from glucose, carbohydrates. If I've eaten some avocado or some MCT oil, my body's going to go right to the fat, providing that my insulin levels are regulated, and it's going to make energy from that. Because if you see where that blue star is on the left-hand side, and we're going to get into this, where you see fatty acids with the arrow going to acetyl-CoA, doesn't matter where your food comes from, it gets converted to the same thing. And it's the efficiency of the process that ultimately determines if you can burn energy. So if a pathway is broken, if someone has insulin resistance or carbohydrate intolerance, what do you think the problem is modeling this thing as your basis? What do you think their main issue is if they have carbohydrate intolerance? For 5 bonus points and a hug from Jason.
An insulin issue, right? And sugar.
Yes, it is a carbohydrate metabolization problem. But the thing is, if you break one half of the equation, the other is also broken because they also can't burn fat for energy. So carbohydrate intolerance and insulin resistance is an energy toxicity problem. There's too much coming in at any one time, and there's not enough able to go out. So you have to figure out, well, what do you do? And if that pathway is broken, the reason that carbohydrate restriction works for these people is you clear out the issues with carbohydrate metabolism, with insulin signaling, and with mitochondrial function by forcing the body to go to an alternative fuel source. So you force them to start to burn the energy that's stored on their system, which reduces inflammation, which restores broken pathways, and then poof, all of a sudden, when they're not a ball of riddled inflammation, they can start to burn carbohydrates again effectively. Why it's never a sentence. You just have to know how to look at these things and figure out what little pieces of the puzzle you can supplement, pun intended, and what adjunct added value things might be really beneficial for this person or for the clinician that you may be speaking about. So I'm going to try to teach you guys energy metabolism very, very simplistically, and we can go over this again at some point if you want. So energy metabolism is enzymatically dependent, and here's what I want to communicate first and foremost. I've said this before, every enzyme in the body, for the most part, is very specific to a targeted action. So the enzymes that convert glucose into what goes into the mitochondria are very specific for that process. Like pyruvate dehydrogenase has one job. It's like the guy in the band who plays the triangle. He's not going to go on the xylophone. He's got one job. However, and Jason, you can add context to this. We were discussing this. Might it be that if you have an enzymatic deficiency, supplementing enzymes might allow the body to get more free amino acids if it's having a hard time making enzymes? Jason, you want to add some value to that or maybe some context?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And one of the things that attracted me to enzymes the most when Troy started teaching me about them, and not to take us, too far down the the rabbit hole, but ultimately enzymes are the ones that control the catalytic process of life. It would take seriously 80 million years for you to raise your arm above your head if there were no enzymes in your body. Sorry. I'm gonna hand it back to you.
No worries. I feel bad for making you talk now. Thank you for that. So basically, the process is very much enzymatically mediated. And again, when we look at the genetic material in your nucleus, most of those things encode for proteins, and a large chunk of what your genes do are creating and synthesizing enzymes, which needs a lot of energy in a cell. So understand that all these
I would say, like, one of the most important things that our people can research is protein hydrolysis, and to truly understand that.
This is true because without proteins, you don't have enzymes. It's the fundamental long and short of why one major reason we eat proteins and take in amino acids. So let's say we start with a carbohydrate that's known as glucose. Glucose is a sugar. That's it. It's just a synonym for sugar, and it's the energy currency of the body. So there are other sugars like fructose and galactose and whatnot. If we want to make energy, they have to, for the most part, be converted into glucose. So this glucose that we eat, we chomp on a sweet potato and our blood sugar rises with carbohydrates. Those carbohydrates are being delivered to cells in our bloodstream. The insulin gets released after we eat the carbohydrates. The insulin binds to the cell, and all of a sudden, glucose goes into the cell. Yay, we have food. So you can do two things. You can make that glucose into energy anaerobically. And if anyone's ever run like a 100 or 200 meter race, that's how you make energy anaerobically. And it's also the reason that you're a lot slower at the end of 200 meters than you were at 50, because you are asking more energy than your body can supply. But if you run 10K, you can probably run that 10K at a steady pace. That's because you're making energy with a demand that you can keep up with aerobically. So if we want to make energy with oxygen, then that glucose gets converted into pyruvate, which is step 2. In step 3, it gets converted into acetyl-CoA. So this is the magic of what happens when this horrendous cycle we call the Krebs cycle now takes over. That molecule goes into this process where I call it the energetic hot potato game. It's passed around and it's converted by enzymes. And then eventually they create these little electron donors that go into the mitochondria. And it's the fact that your body is using positive and negative charge to create energy. It's like the flow of energy in a battery. The body has a very, very similar process. The flow of current is actually what powers our cells to make energy. So it's like we talked about last time, that little story that I ended off with. The sun's energy is really what actually creates the food that we eat. So we're just passing and converting energy in different aspects. So when you're eating an apple, you're eating the sun, and then you're radiating that energy out to the world, which is kind of cool. So this
The
is to
things
show
that
you
we actually eat are light. Light is what fuels our
it's a
body.
hard concept to wrap your head around, but has anyone ever seen what a human being looks like in the dark with night vision goggles? They glow green. So when we're making energy, we have a very strong light emission. So fundamentally, we're feeding the little batteries in our cells, and they're taking these sugars and these fats, because fats go down basically the exact same pathway. They just don't do it with insulin. And we're just releasing the energy from the food we eat. And then therefore the energy is rich in our cells, and our cell can do anything it needs to do. And for me, that's an exact overlay with Hope's definition of vitality. Hope's vitality is wake up in the morning, feel good, do whatever you want to do, be in a good frame of mind. If you are able to take the food you eat, and hopefully the food you eat is good quality, and with proper enzymatic activity and nutrition, convert that energy into energy currency for the body, you sustain health, or at least you have the underpinnings of what sustain health. And in a healthy person, if you eat carbohydrates or fats, they're both able to be utilized for energy. In an unhealthy person, you will eat that food, and that food will get stored on your body as excessive fat tissue. And if your metabolism is not working well, it becomes very hard to remove that tissue. You can
You
eat
think
less.
there's a lot of light in a McDonald's hamburger?
No, it's
Probably.
like you feel it probably clogging the flow of energy in your lymphatic system and your cardiovascular system as you're doing it. So these processes are essentially how we sustain energy. And this graphic is very busy, but it's very cool. The whole point of us eating is to make this process happen. So what these look like, little jelly beans, these are what the inside of your mitochondria look like. And it's a game of passing energy from one to the other. So when an electron moves across, it pumps out a proton, then it keeps moving across, and then all of a sudden the outside of the membrane is positively charged and the inside of the membrane is negatively charged. What does a positive and negative always want to do? Wants to come together. So it's the energy of that coming together that creates ATP. That's really fundamentally what it is. And the model I have is, did anyone ever remember like your elementary school or your church dances when the boys were on one side of the room and the girls were on the other side of the room? And then eventually there'd be that one brave soul that says, I'm going for it. Then all of a sudden everyone starts dancing, and they, you have your bum out and your arms are there, and they say, leave room for the Holy Spirit. Or was that only me in Catholic Church that was told that? So fundamentally, like the law of polarity, we're using the substances in the carbohydrates and the fats that we eat to basically power up these little energy batteries so we can make energy for the body to utilize. And if you ever want to be really annoying to a group of health professionals, if you ask them why we breathe, it's fun to hear their answer. Because the answer to why humans breathe oxygen is right in this graphic. Does anyone want to take a stab at what it is?
Just the necessity for transference, right?
What does that oxygen do? There's a very specific action. You're absolutely right, Bethany, but it is probably the most obscure thing that no one actually knows, but everyone knows that we need to breathe oxygen. That blue star is the key. So when we make energy, we make water and carbon dioxide as a byproduct, which is a very harmless emission. So oxygen is the final electron acceptor. So when you make ATP, you release carbon dioxide and you make water. So you actually hydrate yourself when making energy. Legitimately, you make water. Very few doctors know that. It's like, oh, to oxygenate your blood. Well, yeah, but for what? Oh, so you can carry oxygen to your tissues. Yeah, but for what? It's because without oxygen, you do not make energy effectively. You make energy anaerobically. So it's via fermentation. And when you do that, you create a lot of metabolic waste products, like acids and you change the pH in your cells. And what does Mr. Thurston always said about enzymes and pH? They operate in an ideal pH range. So if my cell becomes acidic, enzymes stop working, I become inflamed. It's all interconnected. So good water, plenty of oxygen, and high quality food, you have the basic recipe for proper energy metabolism. But you also need some other things. You need specific vitamins. You don't have enough B vitamins, specifically B1, B2, B3, and B5, the process gets slowed down. If you don't have enough iron, sodium, potassium, copper, zinc, magnesium, calcium, the process gets slowed down. The reason amino acid deficiencies are so problematic is not because you're going to waste away to a scarecrow because you're going to lose all your muscle. It's because all the things that make the energy metabolization enzymes and the products that get converted are amino acid dependent. And then once you know that, you can start to go, oh, so I can focus on, obviously getting good quality filtered water. I can make sure I have foods with good B vitamins and good mineral contents, the food that's grown in good soil, make sure that I'm having high quality proteins. That's amazing information and convey to one of your professionals when you guys have a basic conversation about inflammation. What are some other things? Well, minimizing inflammation. We talked about that. That's obvious. It's what we do probably better than anything else. Managing digestion. Mr. Thurston Classic, you're not what you eat, you're what you digest, absorb, and assimilate. So an easy way to downregulate energy production is don't break anything down. And then regulating circadian rhythm and sleeping patterns. All these building blocks are needed on a regular basis, but have you ever asked your clinicians, do you guys think about this when you're dealing with an inflammation energy problem? Do you think about these things? Because even though we may not have a multivitamin, talking to them about some basic fundamentals and becoming a resource for someone will foster that conversation where they will tell you everything that they need or what seems to not be working for them. And then there's talking about what impedes energy metabolism. Hypoxia, lack of oxygen. Yep, makes sense. Dehydration. Without water, that whole process can't conduct electricity properly. Nutritional deficiencies and malnutrition, I'm using them separately here. So for me, nutrition is micronutrients and malnourishment is macronutrients. If you're missing both, or as of Jason said, if you're eating McDonald's, you're kind of getting excessively high macronutrients that are a waste and you're not getting any micronutrients to do anything with it. Infections, heavy metal accumulation, both of those block energy metabolism. Issues with your nervous system or issues with hormones, excess Wi-Fi exposure. My feet are on a grounding mat right now. Like I own my weirdness, but it matters because my Wi-Fi router is right behind me.
Scar tissue, scar tissue blocking your cell's innate ability to create resonance.
Then there's resonance,
surgeries, head traumas,
lack of natural sunlight, high amounts of stress.
What did you say about neurotrauma, Jason? Or did you say
head trauma?
trauma?
So meridians are real, and we know that now more than ever, but the way that your cells communicate is through biphotonic light, and it can transcend your gene deck and faster than the speed of light. But if you have a cell that is damaged because you had your appendix taken out or you got hit in the head, that will create a disruption in the resonance of the cell, so it's unable to function properly and do all the things Roland is teaching us. It doesn't know how to open to receive nutrients properly. It's just constantly open. So toxins just pour into it. And then it transcends the gene deck into a state of incoherence. So your cells can't talk to each other the way that they're designed to.
I would say not only physical trauma, but mental trauma as well,
Of course.
All under the same umbrella. Trauma is trauma is trauma. We can just characterize physical trauma through fancy names like damage-associated molecular patterns. But if you have emotional trauma, which is stuck in your nervous system, and your nervous system is chronically getting triggered, all those biochemical reactions are happening in an automated fashion, meaning your body's always running from something. You're always depleting. You're always overburning your catabolic processes, and that creates a separate problem. And this is a hugely important thing when it comes to staying in the world of the biochemical. Our cells are reliant on replication to make offspring. So if the parents aren't healthy, what does that mean for the kids? Sick cell gives off a sick cell, gives off a sick cell, that all of a sudden the vibration of that cell and that organ falls below a threshold. And now when you do some kind of test, your liver function test, all of a sudden it's off. Or you go to you get a blood panel, your hormones are a mess. That's end stage problem, or the beginning of end stage problem. And then because there's so much information, there's a question I'd ask all of you: how can we support our doctors or our practitioners in a systems approach? Like, how do you introduce these concepts and foster a dialogue? I don't care who someone is. And this is no more important than someone who's a generalist. A generalist doesn't specialize in anything. So a generalist should be really good at specializing in the body and then being able to select for, oh, well, this person is displaying this set of symptoms and these test results are coming back. I go here. And if someone is a specialist, if someone's a chronic mold specialist, or someone is a TBI, traumatic brain injury specialist, these general rules still apply because there are 90% of things that all humans respond really well to. And then the rest is selecting what products and what modalities and treatment options we pick for the person to help get them back to where their cells are giving off light. So it's a nice segue, quite possibly one of the greatest movies of all time, sidebar, to figure out what do we do? Now, we're not going to fix everyone's problems as reps because they are getting paid whatever money they make to fix those problems. But the one thing that I found more and more is busy practitioners, busy clinicians stop educating themselves as frequently because they simply don't have the time, or they fall out of love with health and biochemistry and they fall in love with running a business, which is not a bad thing. It just is something that you need to be mindful of. So this may not make you money today, but talking about these things will foster the long-term relationship and credibility, is probably the word I'd use, so that you can make a very strong business case for your suggestions for these clients all the time. In addition, they will always look to you as a cut above everyone else when it comes to you as a resource. So we've talked about air quality and water quality. If we're looking at maintaining optimal energy, and we know that municipal water supplies, for example, have things in them that directly inhibit the energy process, and they're not well, as Jason said, their cells are so open, so everything is just dumped in them. There's no selective permeability. Well, you might want to look at filtering your water or having a conversation about it. The other option is air. We get oxygen via lung function and alveoli gas exchange. So if you're breathing in crap from your environment, that's just going to compromise potential oxygen saturation. Again, if someone's never heard of this, low-hanging fruit. And then there's eating to support the energy balance dynamic. Eliminating inflammatory foods, that's pretty obvious. We need to make sure what inflammatory foods are, but ensuring maximum nutrient density. The way I look at it is, what nutrients am I getting per calorie I'm eating? So if we go back to McDonald's, there's a lot of calories, there are no nutrients. If I'm having a bowl of homemade soup with like bone broth and different vegetables, there's not a whole lot of calories. There's a ton of nutrition in there. They're not the same thing. And then there's managing your macros, which can be done via carbohydrate and fat manipulation. But one of the easiest things is helping someone select an eating and a fasting window. When you're fasting, you're forcing your body to upregulate your catabolic processes. When you're eating, you're triggering anabolic processes. One is not bad and the other is not good. They're both necessary, but you have to be able to dial that in if someone has an energy problem. And the food thing, I'll just, show these graphics really quickly. The reason carbs become a problem is we don't have a lot of carbohydrate storage on our body. We can maybe, on a very muscular person, store 600 grams of muscle glycogen, which is what, 2,400 calories of carbohydrate. But you can store easily in a healthy person 10 to 15 kilos, which for you Americans speak is 20 to 25 pounds of fat on you and still be healthy. You can survive for a month or more, providing you had water with the amount of fat on your body. And the problem is when someone breaks their metabolism, you see how that arrow has, I would say, 3/4 yellow and then 1/4 pink? The pink starts to predominate in terms of carbohydrate metabolism being the only way the body can make energy. Fat is chronically stored, and that fat accumulation, the vat starts to fill up a lot higher. This is another, it's a little complicated, but when we abuse our metabolism, we pretty much run only off carbohydrates. So if you look where it says carbohydrates and fat, the fat metabolism side is being blocked. There's no energy flowing through that. And the only thing that's turning this turbine down here, which represents energy output in the body, is a chronic need for carbohydrates. And how do you know that you're in this world? Well, if someone's hypoglycemic, if they can't go very long without eating, if they're always craving sugar, now that could be other things, but from an energy metabolism lens, their body cannot sustain without chronically getting energy coming in from the diet. That's not a healthy metabolism because they can't actually tap into their own energy stores. Carry this out over 40, 50 years. Is type 2 diabetes a shock? No, it's the body's only way to go, well, screw this. I can't figure this one out. So I'm just going to get really fat and eventually I'm not going to be here anymore because I won't be able to survive. People with metabolic syndrome have a 20-fold or more chance of developing other neurodegenerative diseases of inflammation, neurocognitive disorders, autoimmune disorders, because the energy metabolism that underpins health has been compromised. You need to restore it. So knowing that, well, what else do we have to do? Can't not mention balancing out your physiology. Misty's in Hawaii. That will do more for her energy metabolism than she can imagine, because sometimes changing your locale and getting a break from the day-to-day, minutia of your life will do so much for stress management. Walking on the beach, you'll pick up negative charge and electrons from the earth. You'll push out all kinds of stuff going into the ocean, right? That really matters. But what happens when you're at home? Well, if we know sleep and circadian rhythm is a big problem, dig into the Hedron products, guys. Block the blue light like Bill does all the time on the calls. Bill's probably living with those glasses on. He sees in 5D now. Or use something to maybe help, manage the emittance of your cell phone, emittance of your Wi-Fi router, what have you, because these are little chronic stresses that will eat away at us over time. And then internally, biochemically, supporting inflammation, waste removal, and nutrient intake. So, how can we approach energy metabolism with the product portfolio we have, but also the information that we have, right? Because if we're really, really stressed out, I come back to the autonomic nervous system. This is the control center. This and the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, are the control center for the entire body. So if we are on either side of the fence excessively, well, it pushes us down one rabbit hole. If we're overly parasympathetic, we can't burn the energy that we need. We'll start to store a lot. If we're overly sympathetic, we'll start burning through resources and we'll deplete ourselves. So we start to waste away and our tissues start to decay. And then from an internal biochemical process, what does Master Supplements US Enzymes do in terms of targeted actions? These are the things that I came up with. We can somewhat directly enhance energy production. We can do a lot to alleviate inflammation, which I call indirect enhancement. And then we can do a ton for digestive support. So, the microbiome in the gut influences not only things that can possibly lead to inflammation, but also things that directly support our body's ability to break down and absorb the nutrition that eventually it uses for energy production. Anything to add to this, Jason, before we get into the products?
Yes, sorry.
Of course.
So this is where the things that we do every last little step, the violet glass bottles, are so important because, like we've been talking about, people's cells are wide open right now because they're just desperate to take in anything to survive. And if they were in perfect health, true health, they would never need to uptake anything. If they were in a coherent state, you wouldn't even need to drink water or eat food. And we know that through 0-point field study. But the importance of what we do and our products is the sourcing. They come from a place where they've been fermented for over 100 years in a place where these enzymes have never even known genetic modification. And that is the most desperate thing that our bodies need right now, is just a little bit of light. And we can take a crappy vitamin from just about anyone And especially in these times, people keep selling out to bigger and bigger and bigger factories. Do you think that there's a lot of light being put into those products anymore? They're just being mass produced in a huge factory with a, you know, a smashing pill press just constantly in the background. So if we want true resonance in our cells, we need to try to go back to the Garden of Eden and make things the way that they were naturally brought to us by, you know, whoever created this place. And that's why it's so important to let doctors really know what we're doing and how much care goes into every little thing that we're doing. From, you know, Randy and JT's vision to Troy and, you know, to the Tomorrow's Nutrition Boys, to Hedron, how important that is. Like, a lot of doctors that get way into this functional medicine, they just don't want to look at that stuff, and we need to teach them that they have to.
Can I get an amen, brother? Here we go. And again, little tidbits that will resonate with select clients. Know who the people are that will actually resonate with that story, or change the story to communicate the message effectively. When it comes to digestion, we've gone over this, so I don't need to go through the steps of digestion, but one approach that I would have when it came to rationalizing a digestive enzyme for an autoimmune condition or an energy problem is, well, do you need energy to kind of heal and recover from a flare-up or a problem? Yeah. And if your body's in chronic fight or flight, that digestive process is being compromised. So this is indirect energy support through digestion. You need to bring the nutrition in to rebuild the new cellular material that is no longer compromised. And how
you mentioned earlier that we don't have a multivitamin, but it's right there on the screen. This is your multivitamin.
Yeah, providing someone's eating really well. Back to the McDonald's example. Yeah, you'll break it down better, but you know,
right.
Turd is still a turd if you wrap it in gold foil. But yeah, fundamentally, the digestive dosing for this, it's very much open to someone's interpretation. You know, someone can probably get away with one capsule just a day with your largest meal. Maybe that's all they need. And others might need 1 or 2 capsules a day with each major meal. This is always the decision of the doctor. But what you guys would probably do well to do is introduce the idea of asking them, how would they dose this? And then foster a conversation, and then get the feedback from that person when you do a follow-up call. Ask, you know, how have your patients' reported digestion has been? Are their bowel movements better? Are they bloating less? Are they feeling less abdominal discomfort? And allow them to give you, you know, anecdotal evidence based upon what they're finding. And if they're using DigestZyme, you know, that's got the full complement of 23 different enzymes. If someone's doing the low carb diet thing, or they don't have a gallbladder, there's 2 options. You can start them with Enzylase. You can split enzymes, which is a little bit more mindful. What I mean by mindful is, with higher carb meals, higher protein meals, they can do a DigestZyme. With a higher fat meal, they can use an Enzylase. Or you can just mix both of them together, providing that works for the person. I say foster the conversation, so this way you can guide suggestions based upon use, but you're not giving them a hard and fast rule that needs to be utilized every time. And I like using the concept of enhancement of the metabolic burn with Tovigo. So green tea extract does a couple things that both directly and indirectly help support energy metabolism. It seems the EGCG content, these specialized antioxidants in green tea, can directly help improve the fat burning, fat metabolization process called beta oxidation. So the research shows that those who are metabolically compromised, metabolic syndrome, people who are overweight, because those processes have been slowed down, green tea extract can be one of the things in conjunction with all the right dietary and lifestyle shifts that bring the speed of that process back more quickly. So it can have a direct support on enhancing fat metabolism with, you know, a little bit of caffeine sometimes, as per the research, but it also will have an indirect effect by changing the behavior of fat cells, potentially to make them less able to store fat, or alternating the secretion of inflammatory compounds So when you down-regulate inflammation, you boost metabolism. That is a energy metabolism. It is a process that seems to be mutually exclusive everywhere. When you lower someone's systemic inflammation, you boost their body's mitochondrial function. So again,
one of the things that a lot of people don't know is there were two things in common from the people that survived Hiroshima and Nagasaki, outside of being just, killed by the blast. They drank copious amounts of green tea and miso. So probiotics and green tea help them chelate the radiation and keep their cells in proper resonance, so they didn't become mutagenic and tetragenic and carcinogenic. And right here we have like one of the cleanest versions on the planet, so it's very underused, especially if you have the doctors that treat people that work in the military, or that they fly a lot, stewardesses, flight attendants, pilots. This is super important for them to be consuming along with NATO or Lumbro for the radiation.
And the vast majority of people will simply not drink enough green tea to get the therapeutic dose. So this is a really good starting point that the average clinician can use for 3 to 6 months before they taper off, because the effects do take a little bit of time to ramp up. So this is one of our direct approaches that has an indirect benefit as well, by modulating the immune system and the release of certain inflammatory compounds. And then,
one capsule is about the equivalent of 80 to 100 cups of high quality green tea. And one thing that everyone should know is green tea is one of the most perverted plants on the planet, next to CBD, because it chelates the soil so well. And you can get organic green tea, but just because it's organically grown doesn't mean it's clean. There's tons of runoff that flow into these fields, especially in China. So this version is pesticide free, which is what we want versus organic.
The Japanese, Jason? Japanese origin?
Yes, the TV comes from Japan. And there's every single year, there's fewer and fewer places where it's going to be able to be grown wildly and clean.
All right, so I think I have to remember, we have another speaker coming on. So I'm going to go through these others a little bit quicker, and then we can save the Q&A for the end if you guys have questions. So general systemic inflammatory approach, Therazyme and Youthzyme. So for me, I go Therazyme, attenuation of systemic inflammation, Youthzyme, attenuation of intracellular inflammation. Comes back to that same relationship holding true, that if the body is trying to fight something, energy is being directed away from making and sustaining healthy cells to trying to deal with the threat and neutralizing that threat. And oftentimes, the immune system needs a lot of help. I think Youthzyme, and Bethany can give you experience of her mother-in-law, of how beneficial this was for her. We'll talk about that after the fact, because I don't want to take our guests' time, but utilizing these things.
Yeah, JT, maybe will you chime in just real quick while we wrap here about catalase and stomach acid? And so our reps understand that a lot of the doctors are going to probably poo-poo catalase, but we need to let them understand how we can actually get it through the stomach.
Well, with a lot of products, catalase is stomach acid is detrimental to catalase. Let me just put it that way. And catalase is so critical for converting hydrogen peroxide to water and many other processes. So using the sodium alginate, we get things through the stomach. That sodium alginate converts to alginic acid, gets through the stomach, the pH goes up, it goes back to sodium alginate. It's a very simple process, all done strictly based upon pH. And so that's how we can deliver things to the stomach.
Important thing to commit to memory, because objections are part of sales. And if you have those down and you can spout them off anytime, yeah, inflammatory gangster. And again, when it comes to the idea of dosing, I always like to start on the low side, gauge a response. And most people will probably benefit from 1 or 2 of these a day. I like to bookend the day, but there are certain conditions where you might go higher. And that's Jason's world of specialty when it comes to clinical focus. And the last one we'll talk about is sun spectrum.
Sorry, real quick, Roland, when you said single dose first thing, you mean in the morning, I assume, but on an empty stomach, correct?
Correct. Always empty stomach. To be safe, 30 minutes before food is my preference.
Okay.
And then 3 hours after food is better than 2 when it comes to the evening dose. You don't want that proteolytic enzyme and therozyme to be directed towards another job, because then it's no longer available for its systemic benefits.
Yeah. Thank you.
And sun spectrum is another nice adjunct. Why? Well, our energy production is influenced by our microbiome. They make these little metabolites called short chain fatty acids. And these short chain fatty acids can not only reduce inflammation and change the genetic transcription of the cells locally in our colon, they can influence body-wide energy metabolism. Like, they can contribute up to 10% of the calories that you burn per day in the form of short chain fats. And in addition to the really, really good non-pathogen feeding fiber in the hydrolyzed guar gum, you also get some synergistic nutrients, coenzyme Q10. I don't know if anyone noticed on that mitochondrial slide, but coenzyme Q10 is one of the main players in what the mitochondria uses to pass those electrons through that cytochrome gradient. And then turmeric has a very systemically researched benefit to chronic inflammation, or at least the ability to block certain pathways that prevent that perpetuated cycle of chronic inflammation always